It took me a few weeks to go there, and this is one of the first pictures I took. We were at the end of April. In the meantime, the population living 20 kilometers from the plant was told to evacuate, and the whole area was turned into a no-go zone, even for journalists. Beyond this barrier, we could enter to another world, like in Ghibli's movie Spirited Away, without human beings, only nature, abandoned towns and animals. But at the same time, the radioactivity has no border, and the 20 kilometers evacuation zone was decided arbitrarily, and there was some very contaminated areas well outside that circle. My first story in Fukushima was also focusing on refugees. So this picture was taken in Koriyama City, 55 kilometers from the plant, and 1,200 nuclear refugees were still packed in this convention hall 6 weeks after the disaster. In total, about 80,000 people were evacuated due to the nuclear disaster. And after emergency shelters like this one, people moved to other temporary lodging like hotels, family, public housing, or were transferred to prefabricated units where some of them stayed until now. This is Reiko Sato, 67 years old. She lived in Odaka, 15 kilometers from the plant. She told me those terrible words. We are old, but for the youngest that's terrific. Everything has disappeared. I have a 2-year-old grandson. I'm scared for him because of the radiations. I have no image for the future. When I sleep at night, I dream of the spring. But when I wake up, I cannot see it arrived already. Even those trees, we don't know if we will eat the peaches. 1 month later, I was there again, photographing the villages just outside the Nogo Zone. One of them is called Itae. It was considered as one of the most beautiful villages in Japan. I chose this picture to show how beautiful the area is. The evacuation area is made of valleys, forests, rice fields, and small villages. This picture was taken during an assignment for the Guardian magazine to document the area 6 months on, in August 2011. It was about a mother crying while her son is moving to Shiga Prefecture, 450 kilometers away, by fear of radiations. She also left a few months later. This picture is part of a series about young people in Fukushima, how they deal with the accident and how they see their future. It was taken in November 2012 in a nightclub of Fukushima City. This is Kazuma Watanabe, a 22 years old DJ who works in a factory of a Japanese electronic company during daytime. He considers that people who live there are really enjoying life, whether or not dangers are considered. But he will not see himself starting a family and raising kids in Fukushima because of the radioactivity issue. This was taken just outside Fukushima train station. 2 junior high school students were eating fries on a bench next to an official radioactivity monitoring post. You can now check online the radioactivity level in the whole prefecture, and the level at that particular place is now 0.13 microsievert per hour, so about half of the level in 2012, and twice the level of Tokyo, for instance. In that particular area, 50 kilometers from the plant, it is now in the range of typical background radiation experienced by everyone. A year later, I was back on assignment for French Geo magazine on a story about the Nogo Zone and the decontamination business. The area was still closed, so I had to park my car outside and walk in during the night to take some pictures at sunrise. I didn't expect that, but this was the scenery I could experience when I arrived at the border at around 3 a.m. A beautiful starry sky with the lights of the plant in the distance. At that time, about 3,000 workers were working there day and night. I walked about 2 hours towards the plant, and here is what I could photograph inside the Nogo Zone, a no man's land with abandoned cars and boats, smashed away during the tsunami and still there almost 4 years on. This is what is left of Hokkaido, a fishing village which is about 7 kilometers from the plant. Here is the other kind of landscape you can find in the Nogo Zone, ghost towns with nature taking over everywhere and wild animals back in the villages. This photo was taken in Futaba, one of the towns where the plant is located. The road was repaired, but the area is still off limits. The town is still being decontaminated, and the government hopes that 11% of its surface will be livable by spring next year, 2022. Most of the reconstruction and decontamination after the disaster was made by small contractors, hired by bigger contractors and so on, until big groups like Toshiba and Tohoku, the plant operator. And part of the reconstruction business, especially small companies, involves members of the Yakuza, Japanese Mafia. So most of them are just simple workers, like the ones you can see on this picture. The person on the left was involved in illegal activity though, and went to jail a couple of years later. This picture was taken in November 2013. You can see Takashi Ondo, who was 60 at that time, visiting his former house in Namie and paying respect to his lost wife in front of a small shrine. Namie is one of the highly radioactive towns around the plant. He goes regularly to see how it evolves and to clean up the dead rats in his house. Here is the same Mr. Ando being checked for radioactivity at the exit of the town on his way back to his temporary housing unit. Mr. Ando is a former worker of the plant. He spent 1 week after the accident alone in his house because temporary centers for refugees did not allow pets. He was allowed to go back to his house but could not stay overnight. This is him again, a year and a half later, in April 2015. He's in his prefabricated unit in summer, 45 kilometers from the plant. It is very basic, just one room, just enough space for a table, a futon and a small kitchen. 10 years on, about 2,000 units like this remain for refugees. For those who could, only 25% of the evacuees returned to their villages, usually the oldest ones. Most of the families with kids moved to other areas. On this picture we are in the center of Tokyo, at the famous Shibuya crossing. Mr. Yoshizawa is a farmer from Namie, 5 kilometers from the plant. He had to evacuate, and when he went back to his farm, he found 2/3 of his herd dead from starvation. Tokyo was actually the final user of the electricity produced by Fukushima nuclear power plant, so Mr. Yoshizawa protests there against TEPCO, the plant operator, and the government. Back in Fukushima, in the village of Itae, we can see workers decontaminating a house. They washed every roofs, walls, doors, removed the topsoils, etc. And they had to do it several times as the radioactive materials in the air were back on the houses after it rains or because of the wind. And the contamination was, and still is, a giant challenge, and it could be compared to the myth of Sisyphus. These are bags of contaminated soils in Tomioka, 10 kilometers from the plant. The picture was taken in December 2014. And several huge buildings were constructed to process the contaminated waste, as you can see in the distance. The town has reopened to the residents in 2017 with brand new infrastructures and even shopping malls, but the area by the sea is still filled with this kind of bags. The fishing activity in Fukushima had to face a double disaster. First, a tsunami that took away many lives of fishermen and their fishing infrastructures. And then the nuclear accident that made the sales very difficult, even if their caught was safe to eat. For most of the consumers, Fukushima equals contaminated area, wherever the food comes from. This picture was taken in the harbor of Soma City. This picture is about Fukushima, but was actually taken in one of Okinawa islands in southern Japan. Children from Fukushima were sent there on holidays by an NPO to get some fresh air and safe food 2,000 kilometers away from their homes. A large thyroid ultrasound screening program didn't show a reliable correlation between thyroid cancers in the area and the nuclear accident for now, but I think we've been quite lucky. And this could be the best picture for a conclusion. A sign at the entrance of the ghost town of Futaba saying Denshi Ryoku Akaru Mirai no Energi, which means nuclear energy is the energy of the bright future. And the sign was dismantled a few months later. On a personal note, this disaster completely changed my vision of nuclear energy and made me realize that it was not as safe as we are told it is. We all thought Chernobyl was an old story, but Fukushima proved that it can happen in the 20th century in one of the most technology advanced countries in the world. And it seems that most of the radioactive materials released from the plant were blown out to the sea, so if the winds had been less favorable, the consequences and radioactive fallout could have been much worse and more serious than Chernobyl.